Hey everybody, welcome back to Video Game Esoterica and our continuing series Castlevania Chronicles, where we review every single mainline Castlevania game in the order in which they were released in a retrospective fashion. And today we're going to be playing Curse of Darkness, which takes place 3 years in the timeline after Castlevania 3 on the NES. Before we get too far involved though, do me a huge favor, go down below, hit like and subscribe, and hit the notification bell, definitely helps us out. And if you feel so inclined and want to support the channel, we got a Patreon link down below as well. But last week, if you watched the video, I basically said Lament of Innocence is a boring game. A technically good game, but unfortunately it just bored me when I first played it and when I played it for the capture. The good thing is Curse of Darkness makes up for all of those mistakes, and it feels like a really good, concrete action game that gives me a lot more of the feeling of exploration that I felt that Lament of Innocence was missing. So Konami definitely made up for that mistake, at least in my book. And I also love the fact that it is a pseudo-sequel to Dracula's Curse on the NES. Basically what happened was Dracula cursed the land after he died, and this is 3 years later. Honestly, the story isn't the best in this game, but what is on offer here is amazing, and I love that they finally wisened up and put a lock-on mechanic in the game, because not having the lock-on in Lament of Innocence drove me just a little bit nuts, and here it's exactly as you would expect it to be. Now, because this is in 3D, you're definitely going to have to use the map sometimes to see where you're going, but already this game has so much more going on in the first 5 minutes than Lament of Innocence honestly has going on in the first half of the game. Environments are changing, they're staying fresh, we have a lot of different enemies, and they're not just locking us into rooms forcing us to fight in an arena before we can progress. That will happen on occasion here, but it is not that frequent, and we also get different weapon upgrades, different fairy familiars, and this feels like a 3D version of Symphony of the Night with all of those things that we knew and loved from that game brought into the world of 3D. Now, I'm not pretending this is as good as Symphony of the Night. That is a perfect game, and this one is a really good one, but I'm so glad that the developers were able to rectify all the things that I did not like about the first game on the PlayStation 2 and get them better. But what does hold over from the original game on the PlayStation 2 is the enemy design. It all looks and feels like a Castlevania game. All the enemies are big and beefy, and when you hit them with your attacks, you do get a great sense of the overall impact. And I wish Konami had pushed further with this formula before they gave the franchise over to Mercury Steam and Kojima Productions, because while those games range from decent to not very good whatsoever, this is basically the last time that Konami would play around with the 3D formula in Castlevania outside of the fighting game, and honestly I thought about reviewing that for this, but it's not a mainline entry, so I really can't. But you'll see here, we're going to go get our first familiar, and it plays in a very similar fashion as Symphony of the Night, except you actually have more control over what they do. You can tell them to attack, you can tell them to guard, and there are a ton of different ones in the game, and the mechanics behind them are quite deep. You can name them, even if I kept the original name there. I thought of putting something funny up, but I forgot. And I do love that the mechanics in this game are not just move forward, mash button, kill enemy, and move on. This game asks a lot more of you. You can certainly beat it without using any of those familiars and their mechanics, but to get the full game and the full feel, and honestly to understand what the game is going for, you definitely want to be using them throughout the entirety of your playthrough once you open at least one of them up. We even have some mermen down here in the water where they're always supposed to be. This feels like an evolution of the formula from Castlevania 64 versus Lament of Innocence being a one-off thing that just didn't really feel like it tied to any portion of the franchise whatsoever. And being able to circle strafe around your opponent with that lock-on mechanic feels really nice. This is definitely never going to raise to the level of something like Devil May Cry from Capcom, but it's getting closer than you would think, and I do love it for that. We also have the level up mechanic, something that the game, takes whole cloth from Symphony of the Night. But the soundtrack is also spectacular, so listen for a second and I will be right back. The soundtrack just fits perfectly to what you're seeing on screen, and I love it. I will let you listen to a little bit more coming soon, because this game does play around with different musical genres that you don't usually get in a Castlevania game. And even when they do give you an arena, you can just walk right past it. You can choose when you want to fight something in this game for the most part, or you can decide if you just want to walk straight past. And even the hallways, probably just hiding a loading zone, have so much more going on. The bodies on the wall, the bloodstains on the floor. This game just has so much more detail, and the environments are constantly changing up. I do not get bored when I play this game. I have a great time, and that's what I experienced when I first played it back in the day, because even though when I was younger, I was disappointed with Lament of Innocence, I got this game day one because it was still a Castlevania game and I knew I had to play it. But when I go back and replay this game, I have fun the same way I did when I first played it, versus something like Lament of Innocence where I never go back and play it. And you even have some of the most iconic enemies in Castlevania put in 3D, and they work extremely well here. This Bone Dragon, they call him White Dragon, but he's always going to be Bone Dragon to me, is just so much fun. But let's move on a little bit further into the game and talk about what else is going on here, because you even get the iconic staircase up to a boss fight, and I would say that the boss fights in Curse of Darkness are so much better than in Lament of Innocence. And of course, because you actually get to fight Dracula in this one, I'm definitely going to enjoy it a lot more. But first off the top, you get this giant hulking armor knight coming in that's going to have a second phase that is kind of harkening back to Castlevania games, Bloodlines being specific, but it's just a much better boss fight than we saw in Lament of Innocence. You're constantly trying to lock on, circle strafe around, jump. It just gives you more of what you would expect. But once you do get him past this first stage, you're going to see there's a couple of gears coming out of his neck, and that's going to be very familiar if you watch my Bloodlines videos in one of the bosses in there. This game is constantly borrowing from the past and modernizing it in full 3D in ways that Lament of Innocence never seemed to be able to successfully do. When I'm playing this game, I have a smile on my face and I'm enjoying my time with it, and that's the highest compliment. Even though this is a retrospective, I still talk about things in the lens of nostalgia, and when I played this game here again, I had as much fun as when I first played it. And I love the gears coming out of that knight with the skulls on the end trying to bite you. Every single boss has so much style and so many characteristics and so much flair. Even his knees are made out of gears. The 3D designers and the modelers in this game did a spectacular job making absolutely everything not only look good, but fit the overall Castlevania universe, and I do love that. But let's move on a little bit. We're not going to move on further into the game. We're going to be in the same stage, but I'm going to use a different save file, because when I say this game has weapon upgrades, I mean you can get so many different weapons to play around with, so many different familiars that you can use. The amount of diversity in this game dwarfs anything that Lament of Innocence could even think of doing. But go ahead and listen to some more soundtrack. It's got a little bit of a Middle Eastern vibe to it, and I love this track in particular, but I will be right back, and I'll show you my favorite part of the game. Enjoy! Just an epic track, and I absolutely love it. But what we're going to go to very shortly is the Dracula fight in this game. This is my favorite Dracula fight of all time in the third dimension. I remember when I first played it, the sheer spectacle and scale of it felt like something I had never seen out of Castlevania before as far as Dracula is concerned. I can't say I 100% love his character design. I think Symphony of the Night, those portraits were much better, but it does look like the Drac that we pretty much know and love, even if he's got some pretty big eyeballs there. But this fight is multi-phase, it's intense, and when you have some of the best weapons the game has to offer, it is just pure spectacle. And that's what I always wanted out of a 3D Castlevania game. I wanted big spectacle. I love that in a 3D action game like this. Give me that Bayonetta style spectacle, but put it in Castlevania, and I am 100% there for it. And that's why I wanted to skip all the way to the end of the game and show you the Dracula fight. But spoiler alert, I did not beat him this time. I could have gone back and done it, but I kind of wanted to show you what it looked like when you didn't beat him, so if you felt like playing the game, you could go back and do it yourself. And I do recommend, if you've never played this game, that you do check it out. You can skip over Lament, that's my opinion, but maybe you should play it just to be a completionist. But this right here is what I want when I get a Dracula fight in 3D. He's huge, His character design kind of feels like an amalgamation of all the different second forms of Dracula throughout the franchise's history, and it is hard, but when you do beat him using all those new weapons and power-ups that you would collect just like in Symphony, you feel like you've accomplished something. This is the penultimate fight in the game, and it really does feel like that. I would probably say this is the most successful 3D Castlevania game. Of course, we're going to get to the Mercury Steam stuff, and the first game of that series could be argued to be the most successful, but I do think, for me at least personally, this is my favorite 3D Castlevania game out of all of them, although I do have a very fond spot in my heart for the entries on the Nintendo 64. But yeah, we're basically getting to an end of an era here because the next games in the mainline entries are not going to be made directly by Konami. Leave me a comment down below, tell me what your favorite 3D Castlevania game is. I'd be curious to hear. I'll be back next week with more Castlevania. I'll have videos for the week as well. Bye bye.